And another thing that I want to talk about is pottery being as old as it is. Some people say it's 10,000 years old, which is very plausible, that the first potters were creating things that long ago. It is, since then, in all the potters in Europe and everywhere since then, it is what we consider the most conservative craft on the planet. And by that we mean so few things change. 10,000 years ago, it was taking wet clay, drying it, putting it in a fire, and having it come out with something that would no longer dissolve when it got wet. It became very handy for hunter-gatherers. Paleolithic man would store things in these clay containers. So here I have pictured probably 1830, 1840. This is a roach trap. Potters made these a lot. Potters had to make just about everything. The saying goes, from the earth with understanding, the potter makes all things, was inscribed on several Pennsylvania German plates. So this is an item, but what I want you to look at here is that ribbing on the outside of it, the tooling on the side. And it's just as the potter had it on the wheel, he would take a tool and come up and make these ridges on the outside. That's a little closer picture of it. So the next thing I want to show you is a little cup that's sitting over here on the table, but it looks like it could have been made by the same potter on the same day with the same tool. This is a conservative craft. The first piece was probably 1830, 1840. This piece is from 500 to 1000 BCE. This came out of the Aegean Sea. It was on a shipwreck, and there were probably 1,000 of these on the ship when it sank. The same tool, the same form, and actually the same clay body. The one thing that distinguishes this piece from anything that came, well, within 500 to 1,000 years later, is that the Romans discovered that taking some lead powdered lead, dropped on a piece of clay, fired in the kiln, came out with this glass coating, which made it impervious to liquid. A cup like this is a little wine cup. Wine would soak into that, and eventually you could never store wine in that. When they made amphora, the Greeks and things, they would put pitch, which inside of their olive oil jars, their wine jars, when they put them on these ships to ship them across the Mediterranean. And I can't imagine red wine being stored in an amphora
of tar
with pine tar pitch inside. Not my favorite. So this is red earthenware. It is the most common pottery on the planet. It always has been. It's the first clay. It's clay. We can go right out here in the yard and dig up clay that will make a piece of earthenware pottery. It's everywhere. But earthenware, in the larger sense, contains many things that we talk about: yellowware, creamware, pearlware, transfer printed things, all these Staffordshire things. These are all earthenware. Now people talk about hard paste, soft paste. We have all these different discriminations. Earthenware. And earthenware is not only the most common pottery, but it is the lowest fired. All of this earthenware has to be glazed to be watertight. It'll leak. If you have everybody's used a flower pot at some point in time in their yard, a common terracotta. You splash water on it, what happens? It soaks right in. And it's because it's porous and water will go through it. So earthenware has to be glazed to be watertight. On the other hand, stoneware doesn't have to be glazed at all. Stoneware is vitrified, and when we talk about vitrification in clay, what vitrification actually means is the clay particles in the pot actually get hot enough that they start to melt. And they get melted tight enough that they become watertight. So stoneware goes to that temperature. Earthenware never does. Earthenware will not be watertight. So it needs to have that glaze coating on it. And the third type of pottery, well, this is what happens to redware when it gets too hot. It deforms, it changes, it starts to melt. The upper left-hand side of that, you see it's kind of a grayish color instead of that red color. That's because the iron in there is really burning and it's starting to melt in flux. And when that happens, the pottery actually starts to melt. The previous picture of this, that stoneware crock, if this crock had been in that kiln, this crock would have melted like a candle. It just would have melted away. Earthenware does that at that temperature. So every one of these different kinds of pottery goes up in temperature. And here we have, I have this little cup over here. It's a little demonstration I do. It's just a German porcelain coffee cup. You put a flashlight inside of it, and porcelain has the unique property of being, when it's fired high enough and it's pure, it's almost pure aluminum. The clay body is beautiful. It's just perfect. And when you fire it hot enough, it becomes very close to glass and it becomes translucent. You can take a porcelain piece of pottery and hold it up to the sun and you'll see light through it, especially where it's thin. So that is the opposite. That is the highest temperature. Stoneware will start to deform in a porcelain kiln. So porcelain, by many standards, is the high end. That's perfect pottery. A lot of college courses, they only teach Oriental porcelain production, Korean and Celadon and Japanese porcelain, and that's all they teach. And I will admit, a piece of beautiful porcelain that's translucent and shoots light through it can be an absolutely beautiful thing. But we're talking about redware. Is redware a beautiful and graceful thing?
Well, can be.
It can be. And given my choice of that previous dish and this thing, I'll take this one every time. It's crude, but the difference between at auction and things, I see beautiful pieces of salt glaze stoneware come through, and then a couple pieces of humble redware will go through. And I say always, a piece of nice stoneware that has never been broken looks like it was fired yesterday. They're beautiful, they're durable, and they last forever unless they break. Redware, use it one time and it's going to show that usage on it. And use it 100 times and it just develops this warmth and character that no other pottery has. Nothing is like a piece of redware. To me, that's Jake Menninger, and that's just a wonderful thing. Pottery comes in all kinds of forms, all kinds of shapes, and all kinds of colors. The potters were very busy. As I said, from the earth with understanding, the potter makes all things. And we were talking earlier about what percentage of pottery is what we have in this exhibit over here. And Debbie, we were talking about it this morning, maybe 1%. I think it's even less than that. Potters made utilitarian, plain things by the thousands. And to actually sit down and do a sgraffito plate, which might take you all day, in that same amount of time, turning on the potter's wheel, he could turn out 100 crocks in the time it would take him to do one sgraffito plate. Now, how many really is a lot? How many are we talking about? Well, back in Ohio, at one pottery that we had in Ohio, and this is dated 1843, I think, 45. Look at this. A sugar crock starts with about 15 pounds of clay. It's just a big, kind of like those ones we saw before, unglazed on the outside, kind of slanted thing. It's for collecting maple syrup, or the sap out of the trees. People bought, everybody was making maple sugar at the time because sugar was coming from Cuba. It was very expensive. And so anybody who had a maple tree was making their own. Why wouldn't you? But the potters were kept busy. 10,000 of those would fill this room. They're huge, they're great big things, and they're heavy, and they're crude. But to sit down and say, I have now, this weekend, come on over, we have 10,000 of them. It's just mind-numbing to me. It's just, so that is what potters, we talk about when we say utilitarian ware. So all of it starts with this. This is clay dug right out of the ground. It's got worms and roots and leaves and grass things in it, and all of that comes into play. When you mix it up a little bit and you wedge it a little bit, get some of the air out of it, you can kind of see, and there's striations in there of different things. There's a grayish clay, there's some darker brown areas, there's actual nodules of iron and manganese in there, which when you mix that, they crush, they crumble, and it becomes part of the matrix of that whole thing. What's in here now is iron. We refer to it as latent iron. What makes redware red is iron oxide, which is rust. And redware has a rusty red color. And that's all present in there. Right now it has not been oxidized yet. That happens in the kiln. So we take this, roll it out like a sheet of pie dough, and we take one of these plate molds over here, which is just a convex mold. I think everybody's seen that. And we take that clay and we lay it over the top of the mold, pat it down, trim off the excess, and then we wait, because overnight at our shop, the clay that's on there will lose moisture by evaporation, and it will shrink, and it pulls up off of the rim of the mold that it was on. At that point, you just pick it up and take it off of the mold, and you've got a plate that is undecorated, blank, and at that point, we run our coggle wheel around the edge. Now, we heard today that this is purely decorative. I beg to differ. This has a distinct purpose, which we will talk about in a little bit. So we've seen this plate here, and I thought it might be fun to make one. So we start with our blank plate with the coggled edge, and we cover it with green slip. And the green slip is just the same. We get ours, we dig it. Our nephew dug a pond on his farm, and he brought us probably 3 tons of these huge chunks of gray clay, which fire to a pretty nice white color. And so we take that, we use that for the wavy line plates. We take that and we add some copper oxide to it, which gives it this gray tone, and then that will oxidize in the kiln, and when that oxidizes, it turns to a real pretty green. So the first thing is cover your plate with slip. The next thing is, I always start with cut a border into it. And these formerly Solomon Grimm plates, that's hard for me. I've been saying Solomon Grimm for 40 years. The 8-pointed star artist. All right, so now we come in here, and you can see around here I've penciled in kind of where I want to roughly go with this. And you take a tool and cut that very, very much the same tool as I was using to do that border, and you cut that border in. Now, one thing about these plates is a lot of these areas on the tulip and things, these are going to be completely removed. That not just the outline, but you've got to get in there and scrape out all the clay that's in between those lines. So that ends up looking kind of like that. But with these plates, you're far from being done here. Now, see, Hubner would be done now. On a yellow background plate, he would have done this, dug all that out, carved his inscription around the border, and then put that in the kiln. And then when he glazed it, he just splashed some green copper oxide on it to give it those green splashes. This is just getting started. The next step is there's 2 colors of slip besides the green on these plates. So we'll take the black slip. Now this is, you gotta think what you were talking about before, about the mastery that potter had to do these. You have these fine lines in here. He's taking a cup that is pouring a different colored slip into these lines. It just is difficult. I'll just leave it at that. It's hard to get that really nice and smooth. So you fill in the areas that are going to be dark. Then you add the areas that are going to be white or light colored. And in the end, you end up, then you glaze it. And well, on this one, I double fired it. So I bisque fired it first, then glazed it, then put it back in the kiln and fired it again. And that's the result of that one. And it's just an interesting thing. With the lead that's on here, if you look closely on some of these brown dots on the bottom, you'll see they kind of have a little shadow coming down, like they're dripping a little bit. Well, that is one of the properties of lead on this. We talk about lead, here's a chunk of lead that's laying on the table over here. These little nodules, they break right off. You can take them, put them in a mortar and pestle, grind them up, get them pretty fine, mix them with a little water and a little bit of clay. And here's a test that I did. Put them on a tile. The term for that is litharge, just ground up lead ore. And this is what the Romans, for the very first time, had this ground up lead ore, and somebody somehow got it on a piece of one of their pieces of pottery. When they took it out of the kiln, it had this effect on it. They had to be, this was so much better than drinking pitch flavored wine. This was just a lot better. But lead comes in all different forms.
Lead-laced wine.
To try this experiment a little farther, I went to the hardware store and got a roll of the lead flashing that a roofer will use like around your chimney in places. It just comes in a roll, it's about this wide, and off of that I took just a regular scissors, it's very soft and moldable, and cut about a postage stamp size piece of that lead flashing. And I stuck that in the kiln. I was just curious, what would lead do? And the experiment that came out of this showed two really interesting properties of lead and clay when you mix them together. This is what happened. Right, just to the right of that big thing, you can kind of see the square where the original one sat. Well, the tile was sitting crooked in the kiln, so it started to melt, and it's like a butter in a frying pan. It just slid over a little bit. And it stayed there through the rest of the fire. Well, it melted. As it melted, you can see it just spread out like water over that whole thing, it combines. Lead in glaze is a flux. And a flux, the windows here are made of silica and aluminum. And it's very hard to get those two elements, silica and alumina, to join up and make something solid. Very difficult. You can heat them. You have to get them superheated before they'll even start to mix. Lead, on the other hand, which starts to melt at about 850, 900 degrees, takes those two things and just goes boom, you're together with me. And so the three elements, silica, alumina, and lead, create glass. And they do it on red earthenware at a very low temperature, about 1800 degrees, 1700 degrees even. So what's this big hole? I was shocked. I saw that. I said, what in the world? Well, that's the other property of lead on a piece of earthenware. Lead, because it's using silica and alumina, actually consumes it and turns it into clear glass. So that postage stamp size piece stopped right there, and it sat there, and it continued to use the clay underneath it and turned it into glass, creating this hole, which went halfway through that tile. But I was really surprised compared to the litharge tile that I did. The surrounding area that was just glazed, absolutely beautiful, smooth and buttery and clear and a beautiful color from that dumb little piece of lead. So we saw this picture, I think, something like this, a glaze mill or a quern, where, again, a mind-numbing potter's job to stand there for hours with that stick, pushing that 150-pound stone around like this, pouring glaze into the center hole, pouring your silica and your lead in there, grinding it, and having it come out the bottom, mixing it with a little bit of water as you go. And here's the one that was pictured in the book. The stone here is missing, but what I like about this one, in the center of the tub, you see this little thing sticking up. That's the top of a rod that runs all the way down. If you look down closely towards the bottom, if you can see it, it runs down into the base. And then there's a control there. That's for whoever's doing this can control the grit that he's getting by applying pressure to that rod, which will raise the stone or lower the stone. So we can lower the stone down to get it, as he gets it finer and finer and finer and finer, the stone, he can take pressure and lower the full weight of that stone down onto it. For his own benefit, he's got it up a little bit while he first starts, because it'd be impossible to turn. You'd have to be a gorilla to turn that. So I thought that was a pretty interesting, and also inside that tub on the top, you notice an orange color. That is the color of red lead oxide, and that is what color it is. One of the Shenandoah Valley potters, in Comstock's book, he relates that they would send kids out onto the Civil War battlefields to collect bullets. they'd bring them back to the pottery and put them in a big hogshead, a big barrel. And they'd fill the barrel with vinegar. And the vinegar would attack the lead, the acid in the vinegar, and the lead would start to just create this white powder all over the outside on every single bullet in the whole thing. That powder would settle to the bottom, and after they had done that for a month or so, they would take out, the bullets aren't dissolved, and scoop out that white powder. That's lead carbonate, and that's different. That's white lead. This is red lead, and the only difference there is white lead, you heat it up. You can do it. You can do it in a cast iron frying pan if you want to do an experiment. Take white lead, put it in there, put it over heat, and just stir it. It'll turn pink, then it'll turn a light orange, and then it'll turn this vibrant, bright, fluorescent, almost orange. That's red lead, and it has its own properties. Debbie's program this morning showed a Philadelphia plate that looked basically white with some blue tulips on it. That's white lead. Red lead fires to a yellow glass. So when you see a Pennsylvania dish that has wavy lines on it, you say, oh, look at those yellow wavy lines. That clay is white. It's the yellow property of the red lead glaze over the top that creates the yellow image that you're seeing. White lead, on the other hand, won't do that. White slip looks like white slip under it. The Kaiser mugs and pieces, that was white lead. She used white lead carbonate on hers to do that. So it's just an interesting thing. So we glaze it and then we fire it. This is Schofield, Henry Schofield, outside of his kiln. I love this kiln. It's about the same size as mine. He's got this castellated thing up on the top, about 2 feet or 1.5 feet high. And he's got, I don't know why he's got boards thrown over the top. They're not going to last very long. But I think the castellated part coming up the top is, the center of that is a dome, just a dome-shaped top with openings in it. And this castellated thing, I think, would just be to reduce the draft and the wind that's coming whipping across his open field there and hitting the top of that to help him control what was going on in the kiln. These updraft kilns were very difficult to control, and most potters fought with that all the time. And we'll see in a minute the different effects that can happen. So inside your kiln, you've got your pots, and you've got them all covered with your red lead oxide. Now, underneath that red lead oxide could be anything. It could be a slip tulip, it could be a sgraffito jar, it could be an 8-pointed star pattern. When you do this, you can't tell what's under it because this is an opaque thing. This turns into clear glass at about 1800 degrees. And like in the case of Jacob Menninger, his pieces, his recipe had almost no clay. Glaze is just lead mixed with clay, which gives you both the silica and the alumina for that, so that it doesn't eat away your pottery. Jacob Menninger, I think he used almost straight lead. There's so many of his pieces where it got so fluid, it just runs down, it runs across the bottom. He had a lot of problems with pots sticking to each other, and it was just something that in itself is one of the reasons why his pottery is so gorgeous. Those glazes are so beautiful and fluid. So at old sites, we come into stuff like this. It's a setting tile. So a setting tile, a piece like this is just a broken piece. It might be this long that the potter made. And you'd set these over maybe the mouths of 2 or 3 crocks. And on this, you would set other pots. And you could make a small one and just set it on the mouth of 1 crock. I call this a rail because on the right, the left, and the 2 down the center have these raised pathways, these things that are there to help suspend the pot up in the air. So if the glaze does drip, which it did on the corner there, you can see it. If the glaze does drip, it doesn't stick to the whole thing. It's a limited contact area. Here's another type of rail. This came from Jacob Menninger's pottery. I was there and found this in a big pile of junk on the ground.
Whoops.
But this, why would he want this in this shape? It's extruded. It comes out of his extruder, and you can see where the glaze is dripped all over. These are used many times over again. So how is this used? Well, modern potters today, if you make a 8-pointed star artist plate and you put it in your kiln, you go over to your kiln, you open it up and you put it down on a shelf. Then you put another one next to it, you put another one next to it, you put a little post in there, and you put another shelf in. You can fill your whole kiln up like that. That's great, but that is not efficient. And if there's one thing Pennsylvania German potters were, and most potters were, it's efficient. They didn't want to waste space, they didn't want to do anything. So a rail like this would come in handy. And my apologies, this next slide, it's a piece of English slipware, but it's all I had to demonstrate this. There's the rail, and there's how you fire a plate. You don't lay it down flat. You stand it up on its edge, and if there's an excess drip, it'll drip right into that rail down there. And that gutter thing will take it away. So how did that work? Well, either against a pot or against the wall of the kiln, you take your plates and you lean one after another, after another, after another, all the way across the kiln, which gives us the purpose for a cobbled rim. Again, limited contact. If you did not have a cobbled rim, those plates would be a big scar on every one of them. You have just these little points. And it's something that when you break these apart, you have these little scars on the back, usually over a halo of a slightly darker color. That's what we call a smear glaze. Lead, when it melts, is volatile. It creates a vapor. And the lead from the plate behind this created this little bit of a glaze coating on the back of that one under that scar from where the cobbles were. This would be, if those weren't cobbled, it would be a very difficult, it would be almost an unsaleable piece of pottery for the potter. And you might, when you pull them apart, you might break off a flake that's 2 or 3 inches across. Been there, done that, and it's not a good thing. So now we load the kiln, we just go out early in the morning and light a fire. This is not a very good carbon footprint for that day. People say, oh, wood kiln, I love the smell of a wood fire. No, when you first start, maybe the first hour out of 16, this will smell nice like a wood smoke. After that, once this becomes this black, this is just unburnt carbon coming out of there. It almost smells like you're burning a tire. It's just like coal, charcoal.
It's nasty.
It's not a pleasant thing, and you end up the day you're black with it. You're just covered with it. It's very exciting, and it's a fun thing to do. So during the first stages of the firing, you're building up temperature. The whole object of any kiln is to hold temperature. The idea, the theory is if you even just took a big lighter and held it there long enough, the function of the kiln is to retain BTUs, hold them inside, and eventually your temperature will climb, because we're talking about putting a piece of firewood in there and trying to get to close to 2,000 degrees. People look at that and go, well, that doesn't work. How's that happen? You know, and it does. So about halfway through, we start to get, if you look in the side of the kiln, you see the pottery in there, and you see the flames down in the firebox. There's 3 fireboxes on this kiln, and inside of there, fire's just going, it's just really going to town. You pull out the brick and you look at the pottery, all of a sudden the flames in there, it's ghostly. They're graceful and slow, and just working their way through the pottery, and when they get up to the dome, then all of a sudden they want out, and there's holes in the dome, and they'll go to the closest hole and zoom, out they go. And that's what you see here. And at this point, you can see the flames are coming out. This is pretty hot. This is over 1,000 degrees. It's pretty hot. It's still really smoky. And yeah, you don't want to stand in that or anything. As the kiln progresses, we get to this stage, which is right. I don't use, most modern potters and even wood-fired potters will use pyrometers or cones. They have all these ceramic methods of telling what the temperature is. This is mine. When the inside temperature of the fire that's in there is getting to the top and you have all that black smoke coming out, there is a point where you go back from this with all this smoke, and you see the smoke that's attendant to these flames. That the internal temperature of the kiln is going to get to a point where that carbon that's just above this little cone-shaped flame is going to ignite, and it sounds like a torch going on. It goes boom, and all of a sudden it goes from that to that, And this is my indication that I'm within 15 minutes of being done. We love it when this happens. You're exhausted, and it's been a long, long day of doing this. So we do that, we get to that stage, and after dark, it's really fun. It's a neat thing. At this point, the kiln almost sounds like it's alive. It's breathing. Any crack in the stone, it's the fire inside, because of all the black smoke, it's reaching for oxygen. And you'll see fire just going boom, 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 these little flames of fire shooting out randomly all over the place. And it's just, it's making this sound kind of like, besides the roar, it's roaring kind of like a jet engine, but it's just making this kind of a sucking sound all around the side where it's trying to get oxygen inside of it. It's one thing we were talking about, and I don't have a slide for it. Do it real quick. The olive green color with what antique dealers call halos on it, which is green with these orange polka dots all over the pot, is not slip, it's not sgraffito, it is serendipity that happens in a kiln like this. It has to be a wood-fired kiln, and it has to be clay that has never been fired. It's not double-fired, it's only single-fired. So you make your pot, you dry it, you dip it in glaze, and you stick it in the kiln. That's all there is to it. At this point, well, all through this, where the black smoke is pouring out of there, inside the kiln, you've got a 1500 degree flame, say, and this black carbon is choking the inside of that. It's forcing oxygen out of the kiln. The whole inside of the kiln is full of this black smoke. The fire that's in there is dying. It has to have oxygen. Fires have to have oxygen, and all of a sudden it's starving it. There's no oxygen for it to breathe. The fire really is suffocating. But you're not going to kill, an 1700 degree flame. So what happens there is, as we talked about, what makes redware red is iron oxide. The fire actually goes into the clay, takes the iron oxide, and takes the oxygen away from that molecule, leaving behind iron, ferric iron. So eventually, pots will go from that olive green color to a real dark olive green to an almost black color. And sometimes it's only black on one side, right where the flame is coming across. It's a very interesting process. When you're done and you go in the house and you have a beer and you put your feet up, the kiln remains active for hours. I can go outside 4 hours after I'm done. The whole inside of the kiln is still glowing, bright red hot. Well, at this point, there's all the oxygen in the world available to the pot, to the fire. Well, there is no fire now, but the clay is still reactive. The clay is acting almost like a vacuum. And any place, because we're using that clay right out of the ground that has worms and roots and stuff in it, all those organic things burnt out during the firing. And all over the outside of the pot left tiny little pinholes in the glaze coating where they burned out. Well, now, the pot is sucking in oxygen. And everywhere there's a tiny little pinhole, you'll turn the green pottery back to red. The iron oxide wants to be reunited. That iron wants its oxygen back. And so you grow these little orange dots all over the pot. And I was just telling somebody, you can almost tell up in New England, there was a lot of pottery that had real big dots. Some of them, they're 3 inches across. And that has to do with the size of the kiln. You can almost gauge, when you look at an antique piece of pottery that has those effects on it, you look at those dots and you can say, well, that was a really big kiln because it's a really big dot. Because the mass of everything that's in there, the thousands of pots that are inside there, are going to hold that heat and stay reactive for much, much longer than a little kiln like mine. So the firing's done. You get up. Conrad Mumbauer gets up the next day, he opens his kiln, and sure enough, he pulls this out, and he looks at this, and he goes, what the heck happened? What happened to my plate? That was beautiful. And of course, it only happens on a custom order with somebody's name on it. That's just Murphy's Law. That's when it always happens. So what happened here? Why is it red instead of that nice bright yellow that we want to see on sgraffito clay? It's very interesting if we remember the effects, the two things that happen to lead. The lead consumes clay. That yellow coating on the outside is a layer of clay. Either it's applied too thin, or the glaze has too much lead in it, or when the potter was doing the sgraffito, and I've done this too, you're holding the plate and you're doing sgraffito on it, your arm is rubbing on that slip and you have this chalky slip all over your hand when you're done. If you do it too much and it wasn't on thick enough, you're going to thin that out. Now, why didn't he notice that before he put it in? If it's all rubbed off, there's a real thin coating, you can tell it's a real thin coating. Well, and this piece here shows the same thing. William McAllister decorating this, probably holding it on his lap and turning it over and over and over again. We've got a very thin layer of coat, a coat of glaze on the bottom of it. So I wanted to figure that out. So I took a tile and I put a slip on it. And I did half and half. And it's interesting, up here where my thumb is holding that, was over here on the left. That's where my thumb was. But I did two coats. I did one coat on one side, two coats on the other side. And really, they're indistinguishable. You can't, when you look at those out in the open, you cannot tell at all that one of them has a thinner layer of coat, glaze, than the other one. See? Slip. Ugh.
It's okay.
Anyway, I put that in the kiln, glazed it, and put it in the kiln, and let the glaze do its thing on that slip. It almost completely ate away all the slip. You can see where my thumb was. I have a little thumbprint there. But the slip is consumed by the lead glaze. And so we see those effects on these pots, and poor Conrad pulls this out of the kiln and just wants to, I don't know what he wants to do. I've been there, and it's not a good day. Especially something that has that much work on it, and a beautiful thing. It still exists, so that means he had no problem selling it, even though it was flawed. So now this plate, I just wanted to show this totally different thing. We were talking before about the rails and how plates were situated in the kiln. You can look at a plate, even a wavy line plate, if it has green or brown on it, you can look at those and tell how they were situated in the kiln by the color. And I love this plate, not only because of the way the green runs on it, but the color of the green. It's just a neat olive green. It's not that bright, vibrant green. So this green, when you make that, you just take your clear glaze, put a little copper oxide in it. This one also had a little iron in it. And the iron will just tone that back and make it a little less springy green. So who can say, looking at this, how this was situated in the kiln? The upper left was the bottom. And you can tell, just like pouring water on anything and turning it up, the water's going to run towards the bottom. The green will definitely run up there. And let's see, if you look closely at where the bottom is, there's a chip on the top and there's a chip on the bottom. From the rail it sat on. And the glaze ran off of there and the potter just picked that off. Now when you take that off, there's a tiny little clink, because you're breaking off pieces of glaze and slip when you do that. So it's that's just something when you're looking at pottery. Here's a Trappe plate. You see the drip down here as the green flowed down. And a lot of times you'll see those telltale things. There's another one with a drip over on the right-hand side. And also chips. And that is the end of my thing. So there you go. Now that was a lot of stuff. Does anybody have any questions about how all this stuff is done?
Yeah, I got a question.
Shoot.
And it pertains to this 8-pointed star routine. You've got a dish which has no markings, it's a flat plain dish, and you're going to apply your slip to it. Why are you marking the back of it with the label of the slip?
I had that same question. And the only conjecture point was that the master potter is setting up work and or several apprentices who are gonna maybe not be there till Wednesday. And they wanna know, and maybe he'll be gone fishing that day. He's gonna wanna know. And that's the only thing I can think of. You know, if it was my shop and I had people doing that, I would have stacks of plate and maybe have a note on the wall that says, this is all green, this is all white, this is all brown. But who knows? Who knows? Because I've always said, wouldn't it be great to be a fly on the wall of a pottery shop for an hour back then? Just everything that you would learn. You know, we've always said you can make pottery, and if your goal is to make authentic looking pottery, the only way to get there is to figure out these processes, figure out how it was done. And so much of that was lost.
And everything was single fire.
Yeah. On that green. Now other people, the sgraffito pieces, probably double fired. Every potter had his own way of doing it. And some of them use saggers, which are big containers that you put the pots in to protect them from the effects of the fire and that smoke. So they would be inside, protected inside.
Could slip decoration be washed off?
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't always poured on. Some people did it. Same with glaze. A lot of people, you read books and they say, well, the potter will put a cupful of glaze in a sgraffito dish and go like this and then dump it out. That's fine, and I don't do it that way, and maybe some potters did. I think it'd be hard to get a good even coating with a brush. I feel like I've got a lot more control over that, and I can get the, you know, the amount of lead on there that I want. That's going to give me, I want those drips and those runs, not a ton, you know, but I want them a little bit, because that's more character. The character that Redware has that stoneware just doesn't get, you know. Shoot.
In my own limited experience with it, I've had challenges trying to figure out when the right feel for the clay body is and that leather work, to know when to put the slip on and then when to do the sgraffito.
The British call it cheese hard. It's about as hard as a block of cheddar cheese. If you've got a thing of cheddar cheese in your refrigerator, that's about it.
Okay.
You shouldn't be able to still bend on the plate, but it should still be that darker color. It still has moisture in it.
And that's when you put the slip on.
That's when you put the slip on.
And then you still need to let it dry again.
Mary and I, we haven't, because we're lazy,
Right.
we
Hey.
need to let ours sit on the shelf and dry our plates. But you have to have just the right slip because it won't stick.
Right.
Slip is wet clay, you got a dry clay plate, there's a different coefficient of expansion there, they're gonna shrink at different rates.
So do you then wet the surface again to get it to?
Well, when you brush it on, you're kind of wetting it, you know?
Yeah.
And as you brush it on,
I
by the
wet
time
mine.
you take the brush and set it down over here, it's dry.
Yeah.
And it's ready to start cutting on.
So that quick?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
scripting
it
right
takes
away.
seconds for that to dry.
Okay.
Because the plate, now when you do it leather hard, it takes a lot longer for the
Well, I've had
slip.
the problem where the slip actually starts cracking and separating from the
Yeah, that's a bad slip.